guys, welcome to my 100 Books a Year challenge. Today I will talk about an incredibly talented, underestimated American writer, Kate Chopin, whose book of short stories is the subject of my monthly analysis. The first time I heard about Kate Chopin was thanks to my foreign literature professor at Moscow State University, who mentioned Kate Chopin and her novel The Awakening as one of the greatest feminist novels of her time. And he also said that the novel was not translated to Russian, and I thought immediately that I have to read it. So I've read The Awakening several times before I actually discovered the book of short stories. I'm gonna call her Kate because when I say Chopin, it seems like I'm talking about the composer. Kate was Louisiana Creole / French Canadian, half Irish, and her maiden name was Kate O'Flaherty. She was born in St. Louis, then she moved with her husband to New Orleans and then came back to St. Louis and officially started her writing career. When she was a teenager, Kate was a little bit of a nerd. She showed more interest in books and writing rather than parties and dating. She was a big fan of Guy de Maupassant and Madame de Staël, as I was at her age. She started to write very early on, but then love happened and the writing had to wait. Her marriage with Oscar Chopin, according to some sources, was a happy and successful one, although some of her writings might suggest that she felt a little bit repressed in her marriage, probably because she couldn't fulfill her literary ambitions. The growing family and husband's business kept Kate pretty busy for a while, but then several tragedies happened that changed everything. Her husband's business failed, then he died, probably because of all work-related stress. Kate tried to manage his business for a while. She was left with a huge debt, but then she sold everything and moved with her children back to St. Louis to her mother, and then her mom dies unexpectedly. After all of this, she gets symptoms of depression. She's consumed by her grief, and as a form of therapy, she starts writing. Gradually, she gains more and more interest in it, and seeing that her writing is not bad, she goes and tries to get published, hoping that it will bring some income. Writing her first novel at fault, Kate was 38 years old, experienced, mature woman who has discovered her voice and just started to fulfill her literary ambitions. Staying true to life was essential to Kate. She found inspiration in the French novelists that I mentioned, but also in Whitman and the writings of Huxley, Darwin, and Spencer. One of her crucial ideas was that human impulses do not change. The humanity at all times was pretty much the same, driven by the same selfish ambitions. At the same time, it's very evident, especially in her short stories, that she didn't view human beings as just species. I don't know if it's a Catholic background still affecting her. I don't know if she practiced religion at those times, but it's very obvious that she believed in the higher purpose of a human soul. Half of this book is filled with very hopeful, very optimistic and sweet stories about people who overcome their fears and make right choices and end up being happy with those choices. Some of the stories are light and funny. Some of them have sort of a Dickens vibe in them. They're meant for both children and grown-ups. Also, what I noticed in the short stories and what I really like about Kate Chopin is she tends not to take life too seriously. That's probably life experience talking. There's always a space for self-irony, for humor, otherwise the writing becomes too dull and artificial. She actually mocked Émile Zola and Thomas Hardy because they were too serious to her. She definitely preferred insightful psychological realism to just plain external realism. She didn't like characters whose sole purpose of existence was to demonstrate the author's moral views. I want to say, even though the first part of this book didn't really speak to my heart as much as the second part, I still have to admit that all the characters that I met feel very alive. They speak and act naturally. They just live their lives that Kate happened to be a witness of. Everything, starting with little details like description of furniture or clothes or streets or shops, ending the manner of speech of characters and their ambitions and goals, all of that makes sense. She describes the world with such attention to details that it starts to exist on its own without us trying to draw a picture of it in our heads. Kate wrote nearly 100 stories and sketches. Some of them actually reached some public success and were published in prestigious magazines. Critics praised Kate Chopin's style, but for them she was more of a colorist, meaning she was great at depicting landscapes and exotic communities and their charming dialects. But what they were missing was honesty with which she spoke about women and their needs. In later stories, the existence of eros and sexuality in women's life becomes one of the dominating motives. Critics called her honesty and openness, coarseness, and sensuous ambience. I have no idea what that means. I'm curious to know how modern society views these stories. For those times, they were pretty bold, but even now, I mean, how many women really talk about their repressed sexuality? And imagine in the 19th century. Of course, Madame Bovary, Flaubert's Madame Bovary was already published in France and Anna Karenina in Russia, but Kate Chopin's themes of emancipation are still pretty fresh and daring nowadays. Now, despite the fact that many of the characters of Kate Chopin's stories are people of color, I don't think she's doing such a great job addressing the race issues. She doesn't seem to have much interest in social injustice. And to me, that's a big missed opportunity to speak about something bigger. But whenever she talks about slavery or segregation, she's more interested in the inner world of the character rather than the social aspects of the problems they're facing. For instance, La Belle-Zorette, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, the story that I really like is about two types of motherly love. It opens with the image of black slave woman taking care of her young white mistress, whom she absolutely adores. Her love is gentle, unconditional, warm, like mother's love. And the girl is responding with the same fondness. And then the slave woman tells her white mistress the story of Belle-Zorette, a girl who was adored by her mistress. Again, we see here mother-child-like relationship, but the white mistress is not a mother, she's her owner. But when Zorette falls in love with a man whose skin tone is a little darker than hers, the mistress forbids her to do that. Zorette is a beautiful, precious, special thing to her mistress, but she still has a price tag. And she will always be an object of her mistress's ambitions and power, no matter how much the mistress tells herself that she cares about her, loves her, and wishes her well. Because of that inability to see beyond her own interests, she ends up ruining poor girl's life. And I love that contrast in the story between the love of the black slave woman who has no obligation to love her white mistress, but still, nevertheless, she loves freely and truly, and the love of the white mistress who has all the resources in the world to make this girl happy and chooses not to do so. And that's not just about selfishness, it's about racism. And that's when, for the first time, I discovered Kate Chopin's deep knowledge of a human nature. Two other great examples of stories that talk about race issues is Beyond the Bayou and Desiree's Baby. But the main subject of Kate Chopin's short stories, and the ones that she's really good at, are emancipation and the taboo topics. Many of the stories focus on the woman's quest search for self-identity. Her heroines rebel against the comfortable life prescribed for them by the society, against gender inequality, prejudice, or social limits. The most provocative of them, and famous ones, talk about woman's libido, woman's experience of motherhood and marriage. Some of the stories even showcase the elements of lesbian love, like Fedora and Lilacs. There are some elements in The Awakening as well. Apart from beautiful literary techniques, very bright, memorable metaphors and comparisons, her parallel sentence structures, her unique language with the use of local dialects, Kate masterfully touches the kind of marginalized subject of women's freedom and sexuality, the dynamics of the gender power in the family and the society. For instance, Louise Millard discovers this new sense of freedom when she discovers that her husband has died. The end of marriage means the end of domestic slavery for her. Unfortunately, her freedom doesn't last long. Natalie from The Kiss chooses to fulfill the requirements of the society and marries a conventional man, simultaneously fulfilling her romantic needs with another man. In other stories, like Respectable Woman, the main character decides to maintain her reputation of a respectable woman, but later on she realizes the flaws and the hypocrisy of the societal norms. In another story that I really like, and I forgot the name of it, If you remember, please let me know. The main character chooses to punish and belittle herself for platonically loving a married man. Soon after his death, she discovers that his whole marriage was a fraud, that his wife never loved him and cheated on him. She regrets not telling him about her feelings when she could and conforming to social norms. And she ends up hanging, not herself, the portrait of a man she loved in the shop that she owns for everyone to see. This is her last act of redemption and her rebel against the Puritan standards that prevent people from being happy. In Kate Chopin's stories, unconventional, intelligent characters very often choose to reject the societal norms, not because they're rebels by nature, but because they reach a certain point of the awakening, the state of awakening, the motive that appears many times in her stories as well as novels, and there is no going back from that state of awareness. And that's why I think most of her short stories are still very spicy and deep and modern even today, because they speak about women confronting their biggest fears and being honest about themselves, about their physical and spiritual needs. That was revolutionary back then and still feels like urgent, actual, pressing matters today. So check out Kate Chopin's short stories, pay attention to details, and share with me your thoughts and ideas about them. Let me know which ones you really liked. Thank you so much for your time. See you in my next video, and sweet readings to you all. Bye!